How do you systematize your business? Make delegation easier, which increases your scalability. We'll talk about that today. My name is Stephen Pope, and this is the My Amazon Guy podcast. So I'm now joined by Trent Dyrsmid, founder of Flowster, host of the Bright Ideas podcast, and founder of a multi-million-dollar reseller Amazon account that ranked number 254 on the Inc. 5000 list. Trent, thanks for joining me.
Stephen, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
So I think you have a fascinating story, and I'd love to just talk about your background and how you got to where you were today before we talk about systems. So tell me, what's your Amazon story?
So I've been making my living online for 10 years now, and the very first thing I did was I was an Amazon affiliate way at the very beginning when
it was actually good and worthwhile.
Yeah. I was making several $1,000s a month on Amazon within like just a couple months of starting. And over the years, of course, a lot of things changed, as they do. And the spring of 2016, I took my first stab at private label, and I really didn't have a clue what I was doing. I never took anybody's training course. I just thought, hey, I'm a smart entrepreneur. I'm a fairly accomplished guy. I can figure this out. And it didn't go very well.
Oh, yeah? What happened?
I made poor product selections, products that were too competitive. And so rather than, see profitable sales, I saw break-even sales because I was having to put all my money into ad campaigns and product promos and giveaways and all that kind of stuff.
What's this thing called margins? Who needs that?
Yeah, who needs margins? So fortunately, thanks to being a podcast host, I do get to interview a lot of different people. And of course, when I was trying to figure out the Amazon thing, I started interviewing other Amazon sellers. And I didn't know that Amazon wholesale was even a thing. Just had never really given that much thought. And the reason for that is, I had friends from my podcast go the private label route, and they were kind of harassing me for over about a 6-month period because they were doing so well. They said, Trent, you really got to get into this. So, when I decided to start, naturally, I was going to do the same type of thing that they were doing. Floundered at it, did it for about 4 or 5 months, was pretty frustrated and about ready to just say, nah, bag it. I'm not going to do that. And then I interviewed this guy named Dan Metters on my show. Dan was the first guy, or actually the second guy, who was doing the wholesale approach. So wholesale differs from private label, in case your audience doesn't know, in that you're a reseller. You're not creating your own brand. You're not launching products from scratch. You're basically trying to partner up with existing U.S. manufacturers who have established products with established sales velocity, and you're trying to get them to allow you to become an authorized reseller. So the risk is actually really quite low, which was super appealing to me because I don't like losing money. So things happened very quickly when I started off. Within 5 months of making that pivot from floundering in private label to completely being focused on wholesale, revenue went from essentially zero to over $100,000 a month in just 5 months. We then did 1.1 million in our first year.
That's a pretty big growth quickly.
Yeah. And we can unpack exactly how that happened. I'll just finish by saying we ranked number 254 on the Inc. 5000 list in 2019. So that means we were the 254th fastest growing company. So we had a great deal of success. So how did that happen is the question that I have been asked many times. And if people have heard me on other shows, they will have heard the answer, but here it is. I was incredibly focused on creating documented processes for every single part of the product sourcing and outreach to supplier process, so that I was able to hire a small army of virtual assistants from the Philippines to do what amounted to an incredible amount of grunt work for me on an ongoing basis, work that I didn't want to do, much less didn't have enough time to do. And so as a result of them doing all of that legwork, the product identification, product research, figuring out who made it, figuring out what the right person at that company was, getting their contact information. We were able to send several hundred emails a week or I should say emails to several hundred brands a week, every week, week after week after week after week. And as you might imagine, if you use the baseball metaphor or analogy, if you swing at enough pitches,
You're going to eventually hit one.
You're going to get some hits, like even a blind squirrel eventually finds a nut. And so because we were sending so many emails, I had the opportunity to have a lot of replies come into my inbox. And because I had delegated everything that preceded sending those emails to my team of virtual assistants, I basically had 8 hours a day to just deal with replies. And then obviously those replies turned into conversations, which turned into online meetings, which turned into looking at price lists, which turned into negotiating on pricing and figuring out what we were going to do for them if they were going to approve us as a seller, through to winning an account. And then once the account was won, I would then push it off to somebody else on my team to do the purchase order and open the account and send the money and do all things. So I basically focused on closing deals for the first 6 months to the exclusion of virtually every other part of the process. And again, because I had processes, it was much, much easier to delegate all that work to other people.
When you're a business owner, you're always putting on every hat, right? And so the fact that you could put on a single hat, that's clearly why you were successful. You have a unique ability to do this systematizing, a unique ability to close deals, and boom, that makes sense why you hit that number 254 on the Inc. 5000. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I put my podcast on hold. I put everything on hold. I was singularly and solely focused on sourcing new products. I have a video, I think, somewhere on my YouTube channel where I can't remember where this piece of content is, but basically how I sourced 20 products in my first 30 days. And it just continued from there. And that's something that these days, especially, it's harder now than it was 4 years ago, but it's not impossible. Our account is more profitable than it has ever been. But the key is you can't do it all yourself. It's literally time impossible. One person cannot do enough work to source products at the velocity that we have to grow at the pace that we've grown.
And the question is do you want to grow that fast, right? So those that are listening, they may not want to grow that fast, but I think some of the things we'll talk about today with the systems and processes, it will allow you to grow at the pace you want to, right? So let's pivot over to your systems. And you've got this really cool app called Flowster. I'm sure that's going to be part of our conversation today. What's the first system someone should put in place?
To be an Amazon reseller?
Yeah, Amazon reseller, or even just to run their Amazon business if they're doing private label, even either way.
So, the answer would be different for the two questions. So if you're new as an Amazon reseller, or you're not even new, but you're looking to grow, well, what do you have to do? You have to source new products, because if you don't have anything to sell, then it's pretty hard to grow, right? So the first thing you need to do, at least according to our process, is we identify competitors, because we have a very simple approach. We say, well, okay, there's all these other sellers on the Amazon marketplace. Many of them are small companies like us. There's a few that are really, really big companies like NetRush and eTails and River Colony Trading and a few of the behemoths. But if you look at the vast majority of Amazon resellers, they're all relatively small companies. As a matter of fact, only 4% of all of them ever do more than $100,000 a year in sales, let alone $100,000 a month. We look at, well, what products are they selling? Because if they're selling products profitably and they're a similar sized company to us, well, couldn't we then try and sell the same products as they are, or in ideally make a better case to the brand that those products that they're selling, and convince that brand to actually stop selling to them and start selling to us instead, which we've done on many, many occasions. So the first step to that is having a virtual assistant follow a pretty simple process. to create a list, a very, very large list of those other third-party sellers. And, there's 6 or 7 million third-party sellers. So, like there's a lot to choose from. And then the next thing after that is then this process is quite a bit longer and more complicated, and it's fairly laborious, but it's mind-numbingly boring. And that is to do
great work for VA, right?
Yeah. And that's to do what we call a product extraction, which is basically just sucking all that seller's products down into a spreadsheet for further analysis. And there's various software tools that will do that for you. And then once we've got all that data in the spreadsheet, we apply filters to say, well, which of, if they carry 100 products or 300 products, whatever the number is, doesn't matter. Which of those ones would we want to carry? Which ones are mathematically viable for us? And so these filters get applied to the spreadsheet. And so now 100 products might become 4, might become 10, but it's going to be a much smaller number for a variety of reasons. And so then we'll figure out, okay, so those are the 10 that we'd really like to carry, or the 20, or whatever the number is. And then we've got to figure out, well, what company makes them, and who at that company should we talk to, and how do we get in touch with that person at that company? And as you might imagine, that's all fairly laborious. And then we get to the easy part, which is actually sending them an email saying something to the effect of, hey, really dig your products, would love to open a wholesale account. Send me what you need. Like, what do I need to do to get an account application and a price list? And that's pretty much it. And all of that can be delegated to your virtual assistant if you have the right processes.
So we'll pivot to systems that anybody could use running an Amazon business. But I'm curious, what was attractive about the reseller model, the reason you went down that path versus, say, private label?
Well, one, I was sucking at private label. And after 4 months, and I think and I'm an experienced entrepreneur, maybe with a higher risk tolerance and for sure more capital than the average bear. At 4 months, I wasn't making any money. I was getting pretty frustrated. And the only way to fix that I could see was I needed to make some more product investments and launch some more products. Well, in private label, launching a product is a fairly expensive and time lengthy affair, because first of all, you got to figure out, what should I sell? Okay, so that's a whole bunch of research. And then you got to find a source for it. So now I'm talking to factories in China, and I'm getting samples made, and I'm going back and forth, and I've probably talked to 3 or 4 different factories, and I get samples, and that takes another month at least, unless you head on over there and go to the Canton Fair. Maybe you can do it shorter if you do it like that. And then, they've got a minimum order quantity. So that's probably $1,000, $2,000 worth of product. And then you got to create listings, and you got to shoot images, and then you got to run paper, because they have no listing velocity. They have no visibility organically. So you got to do something to get these things selling. And unless you already have an audience somewhere, like maybe you have a really big Facebook group, but most people don't. Maybe you have a really big email list, but most people don't. So then you've got to pay for ads, either on, Facebook or on Amazon itself. And cha-ching, 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 the whole while you're just spending money like mad, and it's taking weeks, if not months. And if, like I did in the beginning, like one of my products was an essential oil diffuser necklace. If you make a poor product selection, everything that happened after that is just money down a hole. You're never getting it back.
If you don't have a high quality product, the rest is irrelevant. Yep. Totally.
And you'll waste $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 and 2, 3, 4 months, and you'll still be sitting at zero, which is really frustrating. So with wholesale, you get to avoid that whole nightmare. With wholesale, you already know what the product is selling. So let's just let's say there's a widget, and the widget's selling 500 units a month. And I know this because I'm looking at Jungle Scout, or I'm looking at Viral Launch, or Helium 10, and they're all giving me, estimates, and I can average all 3 estimates out and be reasonably accurate on how many that product is selling per month. Then I got to see, well, how many other prime sellers are there? What's the low price in the buy box? Can I buy the product at a price low enough that if I match the low price in the buy box, I'll have the margin I need, which is typically 15 to 20% gross margin. And then, can I get enough shares? So if it's 500, let's say it's 500 units a month, there's 4 existing sellers all at $19.99. If I was able to buy it for, $10, I could sell it for $19.99 and make some money. I would be the fifth seller in the buy box. Therefore, I would get 100 units and everybody else is going to get 100 units. So if I figure out that I'm going to make, $3 a unit and I'm going to sell 100 units a month, I know right away with a fair degree of certainty, I'm going to make $300 a month off that product. And I can figure all that out really quickly, and I can order the product and have it by the time I order it, issue them a PO, and it gets shipped to me or my prep center, and I prep it and I ship it in Amazon. Maybe that's only 3 weeks. And then I'm in business.
So you got a pretty short time window to turn it around. That makes sense. So, part of the risks that hosts, resellers run into, you got MAP, right? So let's say you become that fifth seller, and then one of those other sellers is like, screw you guys. I didn't sign up for 5 resellers. I'm going to blow this inventory out, go down to $18, right? Or Amazon 1P shows up. But you're saying those risks are smaller than the private label ones. And I could buy that. How did you mitigate some of that?
So what people are going to find in this day and age is that virtually every brand you approach is going to tell you the same thing. We don't want any more Amazon sellers, which sounds, on the surface of it, it sounds like a really bad answer, but it's actually not the worst answer in the world. And here's why. If you go to brand A, and I had this happen to me early on, and they're not wise to the ways of Amazon, and they foolishly think that having plenty of sellers is good for them, the race to the bottom will happen faster than you can imagine, because some idiot with a repricer will think, well, I'm going to go down to $18, and it's the second that happens, the margin is gone. So that's the worst case scenario. But in that situation, unlike private label where you can lose all of your money, in that situation, you might only lose 5%, 10%, you may break even. It's not a catastrophic loss. And that's pretty much the worst case scenario in wholesale. So now let's go back to those brands, and everybody's saying, hey, we don't want any more Amazon sellers. Now that is where your salesmanship and your research come into play. Because invariably what will happen when you look at the product listing, you'll realize that it's probably not super well optimized. Maybe none of the incumbent sellers are running ad campaigns. Maybe none of them are responding to negative product reviews. So there's room for improvement is what you've concluded. So then you say to this brand who says, we don't want any more Amazon sellers, you're like, you can agree with them. You can be like, yeah, I get that. You know what? I agree with you. I don't think you need more. As a matter of fact, I think you'd be better off with less. And the reason I'm calling you Mr. Brand or Mrs. Brand is because I don't think the sellers that you have are actually doing you a very good job. And here's a real quick example of what I mean. So when I searched for the phrase apple slicer, I saw the number one selling product, and then I compared your product to the number one selling product, and I noticed they have way more sales than you do. They have far better images than you do. No one's replying to your negative reviews. None of your current sellers are running any ad campaigns. Why is that? And then you just stop talking.
And they don't have an answer, right? So,
well, they might not even be aware of this stuff, because what you have to remember is for most brands, Amazon's probably only 10 or 15% of their total company revenue.
It's an afterthought.
The rest is in brick and mortar. So they're super focused on the world of brick and mortar. And of course, with COVID, this is obviously changing because that's having a big impact. But they're not thinking about this stuff. And when you start asking smart questions, like, I noticed that none of your current sellers are bothering, and I love to use that word, none of them are bothering to run ad campaigns to help increase the visibility of your product. Why is that? I guarantee you they didn't know that. And they're like, what? Really? And then you can follow up by basically saying, so it kind of looks, from my perspective, like they're sort of getting a free ride on your equity. I mean, you've spent decades building your brand equity. You've got name recognition. People are punching it in Amazon. These guys are getting sales. What are they doing for you? You see how I've just stuck a knife in a wound and I started to twist it, metaphorically speaking?
And hopefully they are, that their business model monetizes their success on Amazon, right? Because a lot of them, as I've kind of been down these same paths that you've demonstrated, a lot of times those decision makers, they're like, yeah, but I get paid more for brick and mortar and they're a sales manager. But I think this model is shifting a lot in favor of what you're talking about, quite a bit. So as long as you get in hold of the right stakeholder, which I imagine could be challenging, right? So you want to talk to the as high up the chain in the process, I imagine.
You do, but it's not any different than the business you're in, or if you're selling any type of business service. If you're on a digital marketing agency, you sell computer services, whatever, you always have to get to the decision maker. That's not unique to the Amazon reseller world. People who aren't decision makers can't make a decision. That's why you've got to get to them.
Sure.
And that's why I said that's just pure salesmanship. And anyone who's ever done any amount of B2B sales knows that that's a challenge. And that's just the nature of the beast.
So you obviously got a lot of no's initially, and then you do the salesmanship, and I get that. I'm curious, what's the longest you went to get a no to turn into a yes?
I don't know the longest, but I can tell you the shortest, and it's my biggest account. 17 minutes.
Wow.
Guy on the phone. So I sent him an email. He replied back, we don't want any more Amazon sellers. I happened to be sitting there when the reply went ding in my inbox. I immediately picked up the phone and I called him. And I said, hey, I just got your reply. I really want to thank you, first of all, for replying to me. And second of all, and I went through my spiel. I said, and I have a YouTube video that covers this if you want to put it in the show notes.
Sure.
But I basically just said, look, I started asking him questions. And I said, hey, I noticed you've got a lot of sellers. I noticed your price is kind of all over the map. Any chance any of those sellers are violating your map? And he goes, oh man, don't even get me started. I said, really? I said, so how many of those sellers are unidentified to you? He goes, well, there's probably 3 or 4 or 5. And I said, do you have a strategy for identifying those? He goes, no, man, they're the pain. They're the bane of my existence. I don't know how to figure out who the hell they are. And I said, well, do you have a strategy for removing them? And he says, no, I don't have a strategy for that either. And I said, so what do your brick and mortar partners tell you when they see your product on Amazon below map? He says, oh God, he says, they're calling me and they're complaining and they're yelling at me all the time. He says, this is such a huge pain in my butt. I just hate Amazon. And I said, well, would you like to know about our strategy for identifying and removing sellers like this? And he said, yeah, I would. And I spent 5 minutes explaining it to him. And he goes, nobody has ever explained that to me before. Your account is approved. You may place your order.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. And we have made over in profit, probably well over $250,000 on that account.
And I bet he's thrilled to give you that $250,000.
Sure.
I bet he'd go out of his way and give you another $250,000 if he could, because you solved problems, you added value.
Correct. Business 101. Solve problems. That's all we do.
Every time I'm hiring at the agency, I'm always trying to hire for troubleshooters, technicians, if you will. When I first started the My Amazon Guy agency, I was hiring marketers, or at least trying to, right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, Business 101 these days is totally about solving problems, and increasingly so when you're selling on Amazon by any stretch of the means. There's just so many things that come up, so many problems come up, and the person that can cut through the thick of it, they're gonna rise to the top. So that's awesome. So you solve some problems, you grew the accounts. All of this makes sense. So let's talk about if you're ready. Let's talk about Flowster. Yeah. How does this app work? What is this thing?
So Flowster is a workflow management application, and how it came to be was, so we'd had all this success on Amazon. This guy Dan, who has a training course, and the guy that I interviewed on my show. So he gets wind of how fast we've grown, and he's like, holy crap. He said, that's pretty awesome. Do you want to come and talk at my conference about how you did this? And I said, yeah, sure. That'd be fun. So I go down to Atlanta, or where, I forget where, I think it was Atlanta the first year. And I get up on stage and I said, hey everybody, I'm going to explain to you how I did all this stuff. I got nothing for sale. Take good notes. Here we go. Flowster does not exist at this point in time. And our content, all of our processes, were living in another software application. So at the end of my talk, a large number of people are at the microphones. They're tweeting me, they're emailing me, and they're basically saying,
how do I get a hold of this?
Yeah. Can I buy a copy? And so Dan agreed to do an affiliate promotion to his audience of my workflows. And we sold the lights out. I was like $400,000 in sales in the first week. I was stunned.
Wow.
Yeah.
$400,000 on a business plan you didn't have that you just went and executed because a bunch of people asked. That's incredible.
Pretty much. So fortunately, so I realized at that moment that I was going to continue to sell these workflows. And so I needed a software application to put all this content in, because why would I not own that piece of the pie? Fortunately for me, one of my very best friends is a highly technical guy who'd built and sold a software company. He was kind of futzing around looking for the next thing to do. And I called him up and I said, "Hey, Kane, I just sold 400 grand worth of this stuff in a week and I need to build a software company." And his answer was, "I'm in."
That was easy.
So we spent a year writing code, year and a half, something like that. Took a long time. And I was the guinea pig user. And by October of 2018, we had an app that was ready for the marketplace. And so we launched it, and it's been growing like crazy ever since.
That's awesome. So what can, talk to me about the app? Like, what does it do for people?
Yeah. So think about in your business, and whether you're an Amazon reseller or anything, it doesn't matter. Every business has what the problem I'm about to describe. You have this highly repetitive set of processes that you need to make the wheels go round. So if you're a digital marketing agency, you need to prospect, you need to publish content, you need to hire people, you need to run your social campaigns, you need to run ad campaigns. Like all of that stuff is the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. In the Amazon world, you need to source new products, you need to do reorders, you need to run Amazon paid per click campaigns, you need to optimize listings, you need to do shipments, you need to do prep, again, over and over and over, same stuff. So what Flowster is it's an application that allows you to either purchase or download free ones or create your own workflows from scratch. So what's a workflow? It's basically a checklist. It's do this, do this, do this, do this, and your cake turns out according to the recipe. And it does so Flowster does a couple of other things in addition. So once you have these workflows, as you might imagine, with a super detailed set of instructions, is it easier or harder to get a virtual assistant to do the work that you want them to do the way you want them to do it?
Well, if they can't read English or follow instructions, they're not the right VA for you. And
Correct.
You've got super detailed instructions. So every business ever is supposed to be as easy enough for an idiot to run it, right? And if you don't do it, somebody else will eventually. So makes perfect sense. So lots of detailed instructions, can't mess it up.
Correct. It's the whole premise on which franchises are built. The reason people buy franchises because they want a highly detailed set of instructions on how to run a business. So that's what a franchise operations manual is. That's all we're really talking about. So when you start having these detailed sets of instructions, now you can hire virtual assistants. And unlike hiring Canadians or Americans who, want to work for 20, 30, 40 bucks an hour, virtual assistants will very happily work for $3, $4, $5 an hour, which is a little bit more affordable. And so in our case, and everyone who uses Flowster, that's probably the biggest reason they use it is they want to be able to tap into this unlimited pool of low-cost overseas labor to do all this really mundane stuff that's super important to their business, and it has to happen over and over and over again. And they don't want to rely on people's memories to do the process, because if you're doing that, there's more room for error. It makes onboarding new employees really difficult because then you've got to give them a big training and orientation period, and it's just a big pain in the butt. Whereas if you have processes and you need another VA to come in and do a thing that you have processes for, the training time is about 35 seconds because you create a user for them in Flowster, you assign them that workflow, and they do it because it's so detailed that there's instructions. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3, do this. Step 4, do this. Check, 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 check. When they get to the end of the checklist, they've done it. And then they just do it again and do it again and do it again.
So why not shoot a video or put this in a Google Sheet?
That is a very good question. And in the beginning, we used to do that, but you'll quickly run into some pretty big scalability issues. So let's deal with the Google Sheet first. So if you are presenting someone with a static set of instructions in a Google Sheet versus an interactive checklist, you run into a couple of issues. One, how do you assign it to a specific individual and give it a deadline? Well, you can't really easily do that. You'd need like a second application, maybe like Trello, for example. I'm going to create a Trello card. I'm going to assign this thing to Dave. I'm going to say it's due on Wednesday, and then I'm going to put a link to the Google Sheet. So that's a workable solution, but now you need two applications instead of one. But you run into some other issues. What if your process is like really long and it's not all done by just one person? Well, then how do you divvy up a Google Doc to like 4 different people with 3 different deadlines? It gets increasingly difficult to do because Google Docs is not built for that use case. So the wheels start to fall off.
So does it, like, person 1 does their thing, creates a trigger for person 2 to go in?
Not necessarily. You just stagger the due dates. So you have these multiple steps, and you can give each step of the process its own due date and assign it to an individual. So in like a ridiculous, silly scenario, if you have 47 steps, you could assign it to 47 different people with 47 different due dates, and it would all work. And obviously, no, that's not a super realistic example.
Sure.
But you get the idea. So that's why Google Docs is not great. Now let's deal with video. Video gets even worse. So the thing about video, it's easy for the creator. So let's say I'm the person making the process. I record my screen, I go blah, 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 blah for 10 minutes and I'm done. I had my whole process created in 10 minutes. But here's the issue with that. A couple of issues. First of all, the recipient now has to watch a 10-minute video and remember every last detail. What's the odds of that going to happen? Zero. Which means that they have to rewatch the video over and over and over and over and over again, or pause, play, pause, play, pause, play, pause, play. What are the odds they're going to forget something? Because eventually they're going to get tired of watching the video and they're going to start shifting to doing it from memory. So that's the first problem with video. The second problem with video, so now let's scale this out to where you have like 100 different videos because you've got 100 different processes and things start changing. What happens to your videos?
And Amazon never changes.
No,
the UI never. Every time I log in, it's the same it was 5 years ago, right? So,
right. Or all the third-party applications that you use to run your Amazon business. None of those change either, right?
Well, and never break. Never break.
All do. Correct. Yeah. But now I've got 100 videos, and I got to edit them all because they keep changing. Editing a video or reshooting a video sucks. Like, I don't want to have to take 10 minutes to reshoot a whole video, but sometimes reshooting a video is actually faster than the tedious effort of editing the video. And either way, it's awful. Whereas when you have a checklist in Flowster, if all you need to do is change a screenshot and type a few more words, you could probably get that done in 60 to 90 seconds.
And without affecting the other 46 steps.
Correct.
Yeah, makes sense.
Correct.
So I think you make a compelling case on why creating a system not only saves time, makes it easy to hire VAs and get a consistent product or service out there. So that makes perfect sense. All right, so let's pivot the last part of our podcast today to what is it like to be a CEO post-process setup, right? Because you're living the dream. Everybody wants to be you, Trent. Everybody wants to have all of my processes running the business, this passive income, right? Obviously, Amazon's not passive income, but we joke about it. And now you could pivot to, say, relationship building or any other freedom you want. So what is it like to be the CEO of the post-process setup?
It's awfully nice. I became an entrepreneur because freedom was one of my greatest values. And unfortunately, most small business entrepreneurs don't ever achieve freedom because they're so busy working in their business that they never get any chance to take any time off. This is why Michael Gerber's book, The E-Myth, was such a huge hit back whenever it was published, because he taught people to work on their businesses. So I'll use my Amazon business as a result. In the last 7 days, the gross profit on that business was about $13,000. So factor that out by a month. That's whatever that 13 is, about 50 grand. I don't work there. I don't do anything. I am the owner. It is total passive income for me and for my wife. She might work there 4 hours a week, maybe. So having processes in place and having a team that can reliably execute your processes so that you can achieve the desired result of being a business owner, but having the freedom as well, it's pretty awesome. People look at my little portfolio of businesses, and I have 3 of them, and think, well, how do you do it all? And I go, well, I do it because I'm a master delegator and I'm a process freak. If I didn't have those 2 personality traits, it would be impossible to do what I do and live the life that I live.
You kind of remind me of Rich Dad, Poor Dad's quad, right? You go from employee to self-employed, and then business owner, and then investors. So are you making it to that 4th quad nowadays?
Yeah, in my Amazon business, I absolutely consider myself to be an investor. Absolutely. I have a say. I mean, ultimately, I have the say.
Right.
But I have set it up in such a way so that with 1 meeting per week, which takes usually about 10 to maybe 15 minutes, I've looked at all the key numbers. And if there are any areas that needs any attention, because my wife will put the 4 hours in, I'll say to her, look, you need to focus on this or deal with this or talk to Mitch about this, that, or the other thing. And it'll get dealt with. And I just continue to pay attention to those numbers, those KPIs that are in the dashboard. And it's a really nice place to be.
So no Prime Day this month. Speaking of numbers and metrics, we used to have this fake holiday called Prime Day in the middle of July. Numbers are a little down for some of my clients. What are you seeing in the numbers in the month of July?
So we're having a phenomenal July, but it has nothing to do with Prime Day. It has to do with the type of relationships that we have and the things that we do with our suppliers. And a few of the needles have all concurrently come into the green this particular month. So we're having probably the most profitable month in the history of the company.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. I owe it to my team, actually.
That's great. Well, when you build processes, you can then spend more of your time investing in team building. And I've been a huge culture freak in the last 90 days. So I'm building my Amazon guide to hold, right? I'm very public about this now. And I hadn't been starting the last couple months. And the decisions that you make once you decide, hey, I'm building to hold, you invest in people totally differently, right? Like instead of saying, hey, I'm dealing with average tenure of 18 to 24 months, employees with agencies. Now I'm starting to ask this question. What would it take to get somebody to work for me for 5 years, 10 years, say 15, right? Totally different ball game from where it was. So have you experienced that culture shift? Or I guess more of a development for you is more of an execution. It was definitely a shift for me, but how's that culture development going for you?
Yeah, that's something that we focus on continuously and have always done so. There's a couple of tools in the marketplace that assist with that. One of them that we use is called the EOS, the Entrepreneur's Operating System. And it's really a playbook. I think there's a book you can buy on Amazon, but it's really a playbook for creating a winning culture of transparency, integrity, and communication. And if you just and I don't consider myself to be an expert on culture by any stretch of the imagination, but what I do know is this: people want to be treated like human beings, and they want to feel like they're doing work that's valuable, and they want to get fulfillment. Yeah, they want a paycheck, obviously. And some people are more motivated by money than others, obviously. But what most everyone has in common is the desire that I just described, to do meaningful work, feel like they're making a difference, get recognized for that work. So if you focus on building a culture that acknowledges those basic human requirements, by the very nature of things, you're going to have less turnover. And then if on top of that cake, you spread some icing using processes to create a lower stress, lower chaos, more predictable environment where things are systematized and running smoothly so that it's not so frantic and firefighting all the time, that makes coming to work a lot more enjoyable, and people will place a value on that as well.
That last part, I'm going to be thinking about that one for a few weeks, because it definitely feels like firefighting in the agency world constantly, right? Client needs, Amazon's shifting and changing, policy updates, UI changes. stock, logistics, you name it, ads, SEO, creative. Man, it's a never-ending firefight. So that's great. All right, Trent, last question for you. What is next for you?
Next is really scaling up my software company's recurring revenue and user count. To this point, it has got to 5,000 users in whatever, a year and a half or so. Well, almost by this October, it'd be 2 years. Mostly just because of my podcast and my personal brand. It never really did any of its own marketing. And that is a huge focus. So my goal is to get it to 100 grand a month in recurring revenue by the end of this year. And I got a lot of work to do. It means more advertising, more partnerships. We just hired an affiliate manager. We hired an outreach manager. We hired a marketing agency. I'm throwing $8,000 a month into my growth budget. And I've never done that with the company before. And so I'm really, really excited to see what that investment can turn into. And just some, in the software world, we look at, I guess, well, really any business, you look at a couple basic things like what is my cost to acquire a customer and what's going to be my average revenue per customer. And I know that we thus far in the software space, like 100, 150 bucks a month is roughly the cost to acquire a customer in our space. So if I spend 100 grand acquiring customers at that price, that's probably going to be somewhere in the order of 1,000 customers at 99 bucks a month. There's my 100 grand a month. So seeing how that plays out over the next 6 months is really gets me out of bed every day.
Well, it's all about the numbers. It's all about the systems, the people, the process, and the product. It was awesome talking with you today, Trent. Thank you very much for coming on the My Amazon Guy podcast.
Stephen, thank you so much for having me here. It has been a pleasure.
Cool. Well, thank you everybody for listening to the My Amazon Guy podcast. That was Trent Dyrsmid, founder of Flowster, host of the Bright Ideas podcast, and founder of a multi-million-dollar Amazon business that ranked 254 on the Inc. 5000 list in 2019. So we'll put some links into the show notes. If you're interested to learn more about Trent, you can get in contact with him through brightideas.co. If you're joining us from Trent's audience, my name is Steven. I'm the founder of My Amazon Guy, and we are a one-stop shop, all things Amazon agency, everything from SEO, PPC, design, and more to manage your catalog on Amazon. That's the My Amazon Guy podcast. We hope you subscribe and share it with somebody else who might benefit from learning how to sell better on Amazon. Thanks for watching.